Okay. Dear Chancellor, dear President, dear Wolf, who invited me, dear colleagues, I'm very happy to be here, and I have learned very much over the last 1.5 days. I hope I can give you at least something back. Although this might be, I don't know, I can't foresee, this might be too basic for you in some regard, but at least I'll give it a try. Why doesn't this work? Give me a, okay. We all know that neuroethics is hyping in the moment, not only neurotechnology, but also neuroethics. Here are some indicators. Handbooks only appear after there is matured time of disciplinarity in the area. Here you see the yearly publications listed in PubMed with neuroethics in their title. You can see how it went up. Here you see the last report of the International Bioethics Committee at UNESCO with the title Ethical Issues of Neurotechnology. It was released in December 21 and printed in 22. No, it's only online. And here you see Rafael in policy action last July at the UNESCO meeting on these issues. So these are all indicators that there is really something going on in neuroethics. And of course, there is also a correlate in practice neurotechnology that mirrors the neuroethics hype, if I want to call it like that. Here you can see 1,400 neurotech companies in the last years, and I zoomed the sum of 32.2 billion US dollars spent during those 7 years on neurotech companies. So that's at least something in practice. Now, let me come to the issues and start with some preliminaries. In ethics, in contrast to neurotechnology, it's very important to be precise on one perspective on ethical issues. I mean, you present your data and it doesn't matter whether you had physics in your background or something else. The most important thing is that you do this as good as you can. Whereas in normative questions and ethical issues, the perspective is tainted and framed by your broader viewpoint. So let me stress, even in this pontifical academy, that I take a secular look on ethics, which does, of course, not preclude a huge overlap in moral orientation with Christian ethics, but it precludes moral premises that depend on faith issues or God's command or interpretation of God's command. So no specific religious bound premises in ethics as a precondition for secular society. But again, and that's very important, I think, this does not preclude, in the contrary, a huge overlap in orientation, and so both sides, religious and secular, can supplement each other potentially in a fruitful way. My academic perspective comes from a background in both medicine and philosophy. I've been in biomedical ethics for the last 30 years, not specialized on neuroethics, though. I have been on and off dealing with issues like brain death or neuron enhancement, brain organoids, deep brain stimulation. But on the whole, I have a broader perspective in biomedical ethics, missing some of the specific knowledge of my neuroethics colleagues, I am afraid. Now, when it comes to the terms that the concepts that we use, they, as always in humanities, start to be important because they are framing your subject. The first issue that one has to be careful about is how narrow or broad to define neurotechnology as the object of ethical consideration. And obviously, there are these sexy new technologies that we have witnessed during the last 2 days, but also there is psychopharmacology, there are hormones, there are drugs, there are side effects of somatic medicine that does influence in some respect the brain and the mind thereby. So this is the first caveat, to be at least aware of the fact that what is interesting in neurotechnology is at last the mind. And we might learn from pharmacology and all these other experiences how we settle and evaluate issues. When it comes to normativity as the kernel issue of ethics, I mean, ethics is, as I understand it, and many understand it, is is moral philosophy or theological philosophy, morality, so moral theory that is a reflection of how we should act and how we should act in certain contexts, like applying and promoting neurotechnology. Normativity in ethics is different from normativity in politics, and it's different from normativity in law. We don't have time to dwell on that, but it's important to keep in mind that all these spheres, the three spheres, have their own regulations and law and hermeneutics and so on and so on, so they do not neatly fit together. In some regard, ethics in some contexts is the most basic approach for us to think about how we would like to have the world organized under more or less ideal circumstances. And then we have to translate it into governance and legal regulations and so on. So this is luxury in a way that ethics can dare to have daydreams of some sort. So neuroethics then is a subfield, as I see it, of bioethics, and bioethics is a subfield of ethics in general. Neuroethics is a term that has been coined like 25 years ago. It's kind of standard that people stress that there is the ethics of neurotechnology and neurotechnology of moral judgments, both somehow interconnected. I will only look a little bit on the first one, on ethics of neurotechnology, that is of applying and promoting neuroscience in this time in humans. Now, the big question for me, and that's one of my main messages, is we should be aware of the dangers and also the need, maybe, of exceptionalism in neuroethics. Sometimes you get the feeling that these are all new questions that have to be dealt with by, and can be handled, just from some ethical background and familiarity with the technical issues. This is, insofar, a problem as, in my view on ethics, coherence building is the most essential epistemic tool that we do have. Lessons from one context that we can transfer and modify to another context. So I think exceptionalism should not be seen as an either-or term, but rather as a gradual term. And in some aspects, yes, there are exceptional aspects in neurotechnology, the direct and massive manipulability that we might have one day on brain function. On the other hand, neuroethics cannot afford to separate from all this rich and fruitful debating and judging on other contextual ethical, bioethical issues. So when you, Joachim Braun, just mentioned the 4 principles that we don't have to introduce, I was glad that at least I didn't list them here, but here is this well, not a good expression in this room, but it's the Bible in secular bioethics. It's a monography that started 20 years ago and has been added and added and added on by each and every edition of the book. So it's always a new book that came out. And Beecham and Childress came up with 4 mid-level principles. I don't list them here, fortunately. And they suggest that analysis of relevance and conflict of each of these 4 principles, and then contextualization is the issue, and balancing whatever you have in conflicting cases. And obviously, each and every moral problem can somehow be reduced to a conflict between those 4 mid-level principles. Now, the big achievement of this approach has not been the choice of these 4 principles. I mean, they lie at hand. And you could also put non-maleficence and beneficence together, as some colleagues have done, or add vulnerability, or add solidarity, or something. So it's not so much the identity and number of these mid-level principles, but it's the idea of coherentism. They didn't tell it like that. But they practiced coherentism in their monography, year by year, doing it better and then more reflectedly. Coherentism is just another expression for what John Rawls has called the reflective equilibrium. And the idea is even widely outside ethics, that in order to get reliable knowledge in any area, you do have to approach coherently. That is, you take whatever evidence and proofs and questions and intuitions you have and try to get them into a reflective equilibrium where they do not contradict but support each other. So this idea, and of course they are read, big, well-considered parts of theories or rules like informed consent that really have been proven to be very helpful and sound. So you would not easily give those up, but you would give up intuitions that don't fit. So this is the idea of coherentism. And now we look, you don't have to read that carefully, at these various practical contexts for neuroethical debate, and we can see that there are huge differences between deciding on issues of gaming. We heard about that a little bit yesterday, in the military, dual use problems of neurotechnology. We haven't talked about that. And more familiar issues of medical use of neurotechnology. Now, if you just look at problems and questions that fall under the label of, under the entrance ticket of beneficence, you could draw a line from, to all these contexts on the right side and can see this really gets a very complicated pattern then, a map of relations. I think one of the main issues that somebody coming from medicine, as do so many of you, have in mind is that the enormous potential of beneficence for patients should not be tempered. We should be very, very careful that the public acceptance of neurotechnology is not decreased unnecessarily, but rather the opposite, so that we can really, in a responsible way, introduce neurotechnology, new approaches, as we have witnessed in patient lives. And this is one of the most important things. Enhancing mental functions is an issue that Reinhard Merkel will talk about later. There is a huge literature on the very many aspects of enhancement on the individual, on the social level, and again, the various contexts can learn from other enhancement debates. Just mentioning that there is also a debate on moral neuroenhancement, as you might know, and this issue is filling 2 meters of bookshelves, although, as far as I know, this is not feasible yet in any minimal way. Issues of improving social life do play a role in these debates on moral enhancement. There is a party, Savulescu and his co-authors, who really think that we cannot afford giving up, not pursuing moral neuroenhancement unless we want to lose our planet, to say it roughly. Understanding the brain is also some sort of social benefit. It's an epistemic benefit, and in the huge picture of aspects to look at, funding and promoting and defending basic research in neurotechnology is very important too. Now, just one coherent view, if I may call it like that, on research oversight. You all know there are very many aspects that have to be taken into consideration when we opt for and regulate our research oversight. One aspect that seems to be very important in neurotechnology is protecting social acceptability of biomedical research in the context of neurotechnology. There are all these Frankensteinian fears that one has really to confront openly and educatively. I really think this is part of the responsibility of the neuroscience and neuroethics crowd. Now, if you look at autonomy, we have, Raphael already dwelt a bit on that, so I can be very brief. Authorship, authenticity, mental privacy, there are all these complex, fuzzy concepts, and we could spend hours in debating how they relate to each other. Self-alienation is the other thing. If I understood you rightly, Olaf, this was an aspect that you wanted to test under the experimental ethics issue, so to have more evidence on this issue's importance. Here is another coherence view on informed consent. Look, this is a quote from the IBC, the International Bioethics Committee at the UNESCO. It's a wonderful committee. I belong to it, but I did not belong to it when they wrote this report. It came only later, and had I been a member already, I would have criticized it, because it says, on many occasions in neurotechnology, the risk and benefits are still uncertain. Therefore, and that's my highlighting, doubts about the validity of informed consent may arise. This is nonsense, to be frank. I mean, there are 2 obstacles, ethical obstacles in research. One is that we have an objective, so-called objective harm risk benefit assessment by IRBs or ethics committees. If that's okay, then you can explain the patient what he has to do and whether he wants to consent, and then risks have to be, and uncertainty have to be communicated, but this is not an argument for doubting the validity of consent. Non-maleficent, well, you can read mind control, self-alienation, and so on and so on. Political control, military control. So we have a huge arena of context. And again, I think coherence is the only way we can get out. Justice, it was already mentioned, accessibility, fair selection of subjects, inequalities by neuroenhancement should not come up. And so a sovereign mental life is really something we should opt for, and we should estimate so highly that we do everything we can in policy making and education to protect it. And this is, although, as it was mentioned yesterday, we have all these big unresolved philosophical questions on consciousness and free will and so on, but a robust pragmatism does allow us to say unwanted decoding, unauthorized control, unwanted direct manipulation, Raphael, I totally agree, should not happen, and we should protect against that. So, come to my end, what's the future path? Christopher Bublitz, who happens to be a young student of, and now not student anymore, but professor of Reinhard Merkel, he just came out with a very interesting Age of Neuroscience article on international declarations and what should be realized in them. And here is a quote. I'm sorry, I couldn't have done it better. He says that ideally we should proceed experimental, cautious, tentative, self-reflective, and reversible. And that is really the spirit I think we all share. We should be step by step very careful. But at the same time, we have some homework to do. We have to go for systematic, coherent, and empirically informed normative analysis. And we can only do that together with neuro people and people from the normative sciences. We have to respect the right and value of individual mental sovereignty and the subjective assuredness thereof. It's not sufficient that factual sovereignty is guaranteed. People should feel it and they should know it in advance. That seems to be so important. We have to protect, I don't repeat that, against unwanted decoding, controlling, manipulating. And then now something very Sonntagsredenhaft, but very important. I think the neuroscience community has a heavy responsibility to provide for trustworthiness, integrity, and ethical responsibility more than other sub-communities do. And this is a virtue ethical issue, but I really think it's so important. Neuroeducation is something we have to start to improve in schools and so on, and last access, fair accessibility. And now I thank you for your attention.